Hi everyone and welcome to IDG Live. Today we've got a Lord of the Rings live stream and we are talking about Boromir, a character who we all know, but there are layers there, and I think we all understand that there are layers that perhaps in the movies and the films they didn't quite unpack all of them. So today what I'm hoping is that we can try and get a little bit more of a nuanced understanding of who Boromir was and what role he plays in Tolkien's story, because it's not this guy who failed. He's a much more multi-layered character than that. But as always, what I'll try and do is give a little bit of a potted history to start with, just to remind ourselves of where we are with the character. And he was born in the year 2978. Which means by the time of the Lord of the Rings, he's around 41 years old. He was the firstborn son of Denethor and his wife Finduilas, and he was therefore the heir to the stewardship of Gondor. Now, it's probably worth just reminding ourselves that being steward of Gondor, we often think, oh yeah, they're just there to wait until the king returns. But you have to understand the time here, quite how long this has been going on for. This is hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of years that the stewards have been technically waiting for the return of the King of Gondor. And it's passed down by inheritance, father to son. They've had at least one opportunity when somebody came and had a claim to be the King of Gondor, and that was turned down flat. Gondor was, to all intents and purposes, ruled as a kingdom by the stewards of Gondor. They weren't called kings, but this was a new hereditary passed down rulership of Gondor. So Boromir was brought up thinking that he was going to inherit Gondor. He was going to be the ruler of Gondor in the future. When he was 5, his baby brother Faramir was born, and then another 5 years after that, tragically, their mother Finduilas died. So he grew up through most of his later childhood without a mother. And the impact that had on Denethor, his father, was really quite huge. Denethor started, when Tolkien writes about Denethor as a younger man, he's quite glowing, effusive in his praise. Everything that a king should be. He was wise, he was learned, he was strong. And it seems that a lot of that passed down to his 2 sons in different ways. We've talked about Faramir before. Faramir was a very learned man. He was quite bookish. We would probably call him a bit of a nerd these days. Boromir is not quite a jock, but he loved the life of the warrior, the fighter. He took on this role as being the defender of Gondor, encouraged very much by Denethor, who increasingly, he was going down quite a downward spiral, but increasingly he was seeing the threat of Mordor, and he saw that Gondor needed to be protected. And who was going to lead that? It was going to be Boromir. So Boromir rose to become the captain of Gondor's forces. He was not just held up in hugely high regard by Denethor, his father, but by everyone around him. Everyone loved Boromir. So that's where we see him go for the first 40-odd years of his life. We don't get many details about this. We do know that he never married. We don't know the reason for that, but he's reached the age of 40, 41 without marrying. And then the threat from Mordor grows, which is the point at which we start to hear his story. Because Sauron's about to launch an attack, and a massive attack against Osgiliath, which was the ancient capital of Gondor, long abandoned now, but still a hugely strategically important site on the River Anduin. The River Anduin was this huge barrier, ran straight between Minas Tirith, most of Gondor, and Mordor. And if Sauron was going to be launching attack on Mordor and the west of Middle-earth, then he needed to get across somehow. He needed to get across the River Anduin. And probably the best way, certainly that far south of the river, was getting across Osgiliath. So he launched an attack on Osgiliath. But the night before, Boromir and Faramir, and the two of them, it's probably worth just saying, the two of them had a really good and close relationship. Boromir looked after Faramir. He cared about Faramir. Faramir had a very complicated relationship with their father, but Boromir loved him to bits. This much is very clear. And Faramir got a dream. He got a vision while they were sleeping the night before this attack. And this is, he got this several times, and then eventually Boromir got it as well. So, pardon me, this is what Boromir says is the dream, which is the same that Faramir got. In that dream, I thought the eastern sky grew dark and there was a growing thunder. But in the west, a pale light lingered, and out of it I heard a voice, remote but clear, crying, "Seek for the sword that was broken. In Imladris it dwells. There shall counsels be taken, stronger than Morgul's spells. There shall be shown a token that doom is near at hand. For Isildur's bane shall waken, and the halfling forth shall stand." So they get this vision, and neither of them really know what it means. But they're thrown straight into battle. Sauron is attacking, and Sauron wins the battle, but basically not before the forces, the small force that was being led specifically by Boromir and Faramir, they decide they have to somehow get rid of the crossing, the bridge across the Anduin. And as a last desperate bit of defense, they destroy the bridge and somehow manage to get back across the Anduin and head back to Minas Tirith. And Sauron's forces are held there. Now, what they were unaware of was that this was largely a feint by Sauron. He was wanting to distract people so that he could then send his Black Riders off hunting for the One Ring. But these guys, the Gondorians, weren't to know this. This was a huge attack on them, and they just about managed to get away with their lives. They get back to Gondor. They report back to Denethor, their father, what was going on, what had happened, and they feel they have to report back about this vision, this dream that they'd had. Because Denethor was incredibly learned and wise, and if anyone knew what this might mean, it was him. And what he could tell them was Imladris is indeed a valley. This is where Elrond had been based. They didn't really know where this was. This was a long way away, but that is what that is. Seek for the sword that was broken. That, again, I think all of them could kind of guess what that is. They were well versed in the history of Isildur and the sword that was broken. In Imladris it dwells. So this seems to be quite important, particularly given the sword that was broken is the sword that first defeated Sauron, and now Sauron is come back. So finding that sword might be quite important. So they go there, and Faramir says, "I'd like to go off hunting for this. I want to follow this. I got this vision. I got this dream. That's where I'd like to go." And basically, Denethor's not very happy, but then Boromir steps in, seemingly to protect his younger brother, because this would be quite a dangerous quest off into lands they don't really know. Who knows how long this person's going to be gone for? And Boromir just says, "I'll do it. I'll head off. We don't know what there is on my own, but I will head off." And so he does. He takes this on himself. He heads, first of all, sort of northwest. He goes through the Gap of Rohan, then heads north up across the western side of the Misty Mountains. At one point, he's trying to cross a river and he loses his horse. We don't hear any more about that, but that sounds pretty dramatic in and of itself. He was fording a river and the current was so strong that his horse got washed away. Somehow he survives, but he carries on walking this time. and eventually makes it to Imladris, to Rivendell, just in time for what became known as the Council of Elrond. And at that point, we get this description of him, which I think is quite good, because this is the first time he really gets introduced to us, and so this is how Tolkien wants us to see him and understand him. There was a tall man with a fair and noble face, dark-haired and grey-eyed, proud and stern of glance. His garments were rich, and his cloak was lined with fur, and he had a collar of silver in which a single white stone was set. His locks were shorn about his shoulders. On a baldric he wore a great horn tipped with silver that now was laid upon his knees. So that is how Tolkien wants us to first understand Boromir. He's got a noble face. He's tall. He's definitely over 6 foot. So some people have gone through and sort of done the comparisons in the text when people are saying this person looked up to that person or looked down to that person, and he seems to be about 6'4", perhaps, or for those on the metric system, that's 192, 193 centimeters, something like that. So he's a tall guy. He's an imposing figure. He's dressed well. He's got a very impressive sort of horn that we'll talk a bit more about later, and he's got like this noble face. So he comes across well to start with, if perhaps a little proud. And at the Council of Elrond, his yes, in the films, then we have a few moments of Sean Bean being epic with the "one does not simply walk into Mordor," but his approach in the books is to start with very much just trying to explain to these people what Gondor has been facing, because he doesn't know all of it. This is still there. The story is slowly unfolds in the Council of Elrond. But as far as he's concerned, for thousands of years, Gondor has stood there as the bastion of defense against Mordor. And now he's come hot tail from a battle where it becomes very clear that Sauron has amassed a huge army. His father has seen, he's been using his Palantir, he's seen the strength of Sauron, the strength of Mordor. And the only people, as far as Boromir is concerned, the only people who are standing in the way of Sauron sweeping across all of Middle-earth is Minas Tirith. It's Gondor. And who are all of these people? Well, he doesn't know anything about the halflings. The dwarves have been hidden away in their underground worlds for all this time. The elves rarely venture beyond their own forests and valleys. And who is this Aragorn character? He has to immediately sort of say, you guys probably don't realize everything that's going on out there. Sauron is coming, and we're the people in the way. But he clarifies he's not here begging their aid. He's coming here not to say we want you to come and help us. He's here because he's following this vision, this calling almost. And the story unravels. The story unravels about the ring, and he does start to think, well, hang on a moment. This is a powerful ring. Maybe this is the thing which can help us. It seems illogical to him, certainly to start with. For us, with hindsight, obviously there are a lot of issues going on here, but for him, this seems pretty obvious. This is a powerful magical ring, and we need something incredibly powerful to stop Sauron, so why don't we use this ring? And obviously Elrond, Gandalf are like, no, you can't do that. But to give credit to Boromir, he accepts this. He accepts that that's not the plan. The plan that the Council of Elrond comes up with is to destroy this ring. So he's done his duty now. He's sought the sword that was broken. He has gone to Imladris, and clearly some events have been set off. But now he needs to get back to Gondor. He needs to go back. And he is he is selected to be a member of the Fellowship, but the selection of the Fellowship is slightly different in nuance in the books, in as much as the only person who is commissioned to do anything in the books is Frodo. Frodo is commissioned to go to Mordor to destroy the ring, and the rest are commissioned only to travel with him for as long as they wish to, and to protect him, and to be a part of the Fellowship for as long as they want to. If the moment they want to leave, they can leave. And so Boromir is happy to go along. He's going that way anyway. So the route back towards Gondor is 90% of the route towards Mordor. So he's happy to go along with them. It's quite dangerous territory, and hey, who knows? Maybe he could persuade them en route to sort of pop by Minas Tirith. And on the journey, he proves pretty useful, actually, in very practical ways sometimes. When they're going and they're trying to cross over Chradras, they're heading over the mountains. He's the person who said, hey, we should probably take a little bit of firewood. It looks quite cold up there. And then they go, oh, yeah, good idea. And so they all carry this firewood up with them. And then when all the heavy snows come, that's what keeps them alive, basically, overnight. They hide in a sort of a cave mouth, and they need those fires. And then on the way back, the snowdrifts are so high that it's too high for the hobbits to walk through. So he and Aragorn pick up the hobbits and carry them through the snow. He's incredibly useful in those practical ways. Then he's arguing that maybe we should just go the way he came to start with. And Gandalf's, no, we can't go that close to Saruman. We know that Saruman's gone bad. And so they say, let's go through Moria. And Boromir's, he's not keen. And he says, I'm not going through Moria unless everybody else votes for it. But they all vote for it. So he goes, fine. They get to Moria, and then they get to the gates. And then Gandalf is like, yeah, I don't actually know the password here. At which point, again, another interesting change between the books and the film. It's Boromir who is understandably frustrated, and he's the one who throws the stone into the water, which disturbs the Watcher in the Water. So he, at this point, is getting incredibly frustrated that it's not really, none of this is really going how he wanted. He's been away. When you add up all the time, he'll be gone for maybe 9 months or so, away from Gondor, the defense of Minas Tirith, for nothing, as far as he's concerned. So he's starting to get very frustrated with all of this. When they get into Moria, again, he proves useful. When you read the battle scenes, you can see, and Tolkien tends not to focus too much on the battle scenes, but he more than holds his own. He is really rather heroic in those battle scenes. And then when they escape out the other side and Gandalf has disappeared, presumed dead, and Aragorn says, right, that's it, I'm taking over now, and we're going to go to Lothlorien. And then again, Boromir is like, I don't want to go to Lorien. Have you not heard the stories about Lothlorien? But again, he gets overruled, and again, they go on. So even through all of this time, nothing is going the way that Boromir is wanting. But they get there. They eventually get led into Celeborn and Galadriel's presence. And at which point they admit Gandalf has gone, and she is kind of reading their minds, and he does not like this at all. But he then starts wondering, so Frodo, I know what she was like, kind of tempting me. We'll look at this in a bit more detail later. What was it with you? And then from then on, you see that he starts to become more and more focused in on Frodo and the ring. The closer they get back to home, when they emerge from Lothlorien and they start paddling down the river. He's there. He's in the boat with Merry and Pippin, and Merry and Pippin notice that a lot of the time he starts just staring at Frodo, and sometimes the boat gets right up close to the boat that Frodo's in. And they're starting to get a little bit concerned about this. And then when they stop, Boromir's starting to make his case a bit stronger. He's saying, well, I know at some point we need to make a decision. Do we keep on going across the river into Mordor, or should we head to Minas Tirith? Because actually this will be useful. If we go to Mordor, it's just death. You're going to die there. We can actually use this if we go to Gondor, to Minas Tirith. And eventually they reach the actual decision point. Now, we know that last scene so well. Frodo heads off just to think about things. Boromir goes after him, and Boromir tries to convince him that he should go with him. Or if not go with him, then perhaps give the ring to him. And it's very clear that at this point, the ring's power has really taken over Boromir. To the point where he does try to take the ring from Frodo. Frodo escapes, puts on the ring and escapes, and Boromir realizes what has happened. When he comes back to the camp, it's like, where's Frodo? I don't know, but everybody realizes something's gone on. Frodo's missing. Merry and Pippin run off looking for Frodo, because that's the kind of hobbits that they are. And Aragorn tells Boromir, go look after Merry and Pippin. And so he does. And his end is heroic. He saves Merry and Pippin for a short while, not forever, obviously. They do get captured. But when Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli find him dying, there are, we're told, 20 orc bodies around him. So he wasn't just like an okay fighter. This was clearly someone who is extra level hero. He is astonishing. So he dies. And Legolas and Gimli and Aragorn take the time to give him a proper send-off. They put him in a boat. They put the Horn of Gondor, this great family heirloom, which has been cut in half, and they put him in the boat and push it off towards the great waterfall, and it goes over the waterfall, and that's the last they see. They sing laments, songs to him, but that's the last they see of him. It's not the last anyone sees of him, because the boat heads downriver, and then 3 days later we get Faramir, who sees that body go past. And much later, the two parts of the Horn of Gondor are found washed up on the shore. Boromir himself, the assumption is that his body just washed out to sea. And that's the end of Boromir. So what are we to make of him? We'll kind of dig into this story as we go along. But I think ultimately we are to view him as a tragedy, as a great but flawed character, and also as a literary device to show us the power of the ring. Because if we didn't have somebody that we actually like and care about being affected that early by the power of the ring, then we perhaps lose a little bit of an understanding of it. We get hints of it. We see Bilbo feeling stretched like too little butter spread over too much bread. We get all of this. We see him not wanting to give up the ring. We see Frodo starting to get a little bit stressed about it. We obviously see Gollum, but Boromir is where we see the ring in action. So that's the kind of the literary purpose of him. But we'll unpack a bit more about him as a person. Okay, let's quickly flick to the chat. Maura Lee, that's very generous, Maura. Thank you so much. Saying, in honor of Sam, Farmer Maggot, Tom Bombadil, and Dan, your handsome dog, just a show of love and appreciation for all the content, merch, and stories. You are the best, dear Robert. Well, thank you, Maura. I hugely appreciate that and your amazing support. And another question here somewhere. So Smurfies saying, thought I'd stop in and say hello before my drive home from work. I'll be listening to this on my postal route tomorrow. Also, Witcher content idea, a bestiary, or traveler's guide, or a mesh of both. Love the videos. Well, thank you very much. I hugely appreciate that. Yeah, so I've started regular-ish Witcher videos. I've done them sort of on and off in the past, but I've decided I think I've got a little bit more capacity now to be producing Witcher videos, focusing very much firstly on the books, but then also trying to see how this fits in with the videos as well as the show. So yeah, I'm glad you're enjoying that, and yeah, those are good ideas. Let me say, I may well be able to get to some of them. Roman Lakovets saying, if Boromir had been born in Westeros, do you think he would have been a better Hand of the King than Ned Stark? Wow. Okay, so I've got another question later about the sort of the Ned Stark comparisons, because I think this is a really interesting one. But in terms of whether he'd be a good Hand of the King, I mean, a wartime Hand of the King, perhaps. The thing about Boromir, he wasn't very bookish. He wasn't particularly. I mean, he wasn't particularly patient. He happily went off for many months on a trek for something. But his love and his strength was in warfare and being the leader of an army. So, does that make a great first advisor, Hand of the King? Occasionally, it can do. But if you're in peacetime or something like that, then probably he wouldn't be that interested. Carl Karsnark saying that Boromir's greed is great foreshadowing for Gollum too. Yes, I mean, it's worth pointing out that at this point we've not really been introduced to Gollum. He doesn't really come in until partway into the second book. He is there sort of in the background in the Fellowship of the Ring, but we don't really know him huge amounts. Shows early on that even very good people can or will be corrupted by the ring. It's just a matter of time and motivation. Yeah, absolutely. Os asking, did the ring target Boromir to lure him specifically, or is its temptation more of a general aura that Boromir was simply more susceptible to than others? I think it's a bit of both. There is definitely a sort of I don't know whether general aura is the right way of saying it, but I understand entirely what you mean. It's just everyone can be impacted by the ring, but it does certainly seem to focus in sometimes. Right, let's go to Rachel Simpson saying, finally caught a live stream actually live. Welcome, great to see you. Kingdom of the Source. Let's go into some questions from my patrons now. Kingdom of the Source saying, hi Robert, what can you tell us of Boromir's lineage? He seems to be mostly pure Númenórean with some elf blood. Do you think he could have lived as long as the Dúnedain of old, or even live as long as the descendants of Elros? Also, is there anything you could tell us of Boromir's mother's lineage? Okay, so Boromir's mother was Finduilas. Finduilas was the sister of Imrahil, the Prince of Dol Amroth. Now, he's not a character who usually appears in the films, but he is an excellent character. I did a video about him a while ago. He's a bit of a hero. When we get to the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, he is probably the MVP. He's the person who achieves personally the most in that battle. Now, that family, the ruling family of Dol Amroth, they trace their lineage back to elves. And indeed, when Legolas sees Prince Imrahil, he said a couple of times, he says, no, this guy's got some elven ancestry. I can tell this. So Finduilas has that too. So we don't learn huge amounts about her as a person. Tolkien often kind of sort of glazes over the character of a lot of the non-central women in his story. But she clearly was somewhat of a counterweight to Denethor, and he was clearly in love with her very much. He did not really descend down into the Denethor that we see in The Lord of the Rings or the process did not seem to start until she had died. So what we have in terms of ancestry is that we get that one side comes a very noble Gondorian ancestry that was part descended from Numenor and part descended from elves a long way back, or an elf a long way back. And then on his father's side, the line of the stewards, they also were of Numenorian descent. They were they were relatives to the original ruling kingly family. So this goes back many generations. But when we get to Denethor and then his two sons, Boromir and Faramir, they're generally described as being the best and noblest of this generation. That's where they are at. Not a patch, though, on the Numenorians of old in terms of longevity. Now, we would expect them to live longer lives than perhaps an average human, but not the same as with, say, someone like Aragorn, who lived beyond 200, and certainly not as long as you talked about King Elros, who was the first king of Numenor. He lived to he started off as a half-elf. He's Elrond's twin brother, but then he reigned for about, I think it was 400 years as king of Numenor. So not anywhere close to that, but as good as you can get at that point. Let's go to a question from George R.R. Tolkien, saying, salutations, Robert. I was wondering why Boromir couldn't look at Galadriel in Lothlorien. Yeah, so this was something, it was played up quite a bit, I think, in the films. You get, if you remember the scene, they're all kind of lined up in front of Galadriel and Celeborn sort of droning on about something, and then Galadriel's kind of staring at them one at a time, and she's just like projecting into their minds this kind of telepathic thing going on, and Boromir can't keep her eye. This is what it says in the books about that scene. She held them being the Fellowship, she held them with her eyes, and in silence looked searchingly at each of them in turn. None save Legolas and Aragorn could long endure her glance. So in the book, it wasn't just Boromir. It was actually only Aragorn and Legolas who could sort of stare back at her. So this wasn't something which was in the films. They were, understandably, because they had to get from that point to what happened with Boromir really quite quickly. And so understandably, they were wanting to focus our minds in on what's going on with Boromir. But in the books at this point, yes, Galadriel's gaze is a bit hard for everyone. And then we read on a little bit of a sort of an explanation here, because afterwards they're sort of chatting amongst themselves. The Fellowship, they've been told, you can just relax now, get a bit of sleep, have some food. We're all going to be mourning Gandalf for a while. And they start chatting. And this is what we read. All of them, it seemed, when they're talking about what happened with Galadriel, all of them, it seemed, had fared alike. Each had felt that he was offered a choice between a shadow full of fear that lay ahead and something that he greatly desired. Clear before his mind it lay, and to get it, he only had to turn aside from the road and leave the quest and the war against Sauron to others. "And it seemed to me too," said Gimli, "that my choice would remain secret and known only to myself." "To me, it seemed exceedingly strange," said Boromir. "Maybe it was only a test, and she thought to read our thoughts for her own good purpose. But almost I should have said that she was tempting us, and offering what she pretended to have the power to give. It need not be said that I refused to listen. The men of Minas Tirith are true to their word. But what he thought that the lady had offered him, Boromir did not tell." So this is really intriguing, because Tolkien talked a few times about telepathy, and how if this is and the whole kind of world around that kind of magic, and he basically said that if there's two people who want to sort of telepathically chat, that's absolutely fine. But somebody going into somebody else's mind and kind of reading that person's mind, that's not right. That should not be allowed. That's pretty evil, actually. And so Galadriel's kind of towing quite a fine line here. Tolkien is sort of giving us hints that although, yes, she comes across as this incredibly wise and wonderful person, there's hidden back there's a possibility of darkness, which is what we obviously see with that great scene a little bit later when Frodo offers her the ring and she's tempted by it. But here we're just getting a hint of it, that she's not reading their minds if they refuse. And here Boromir seems to have refused. He sort of said nope. And she seems to have sort of backed off there. But she is testing them in some way. And the test seems to be, at a very basic level, are these people going to carry on with this? If I tempt them with this really nice thing and I show them quite how terrible it is going forward, are they willing to back down? And the reactions we get are interesting here, because Gimli's just like saying, she offered something, and it's clear that no one else would know what I decide. But Boromir immediately is there saying, I think she was offering something she didn't have the power to give. So it's not really a temptation. And he's analyzing what it was that she was trying to do. And you can almost feel all of his guard up. None of them liked it. It's probably fair to say. None of them said, "Yo, that was a really nice experience. I'm glad she came in and had a little chat with them and sort of like put these images and thoughts in my mind." None of them liked it. But Boromir was the one who most put his shutters up. Now, part of that, I think, does hint at the way that he is. We often think of him as being like just a human, but he is quite a powerful human in Tolkien's kind of way of saying this. He does have strong control over his mind. So what are we to make of all of that from Boromir's perspective? Why was it in the film that he couldn't look at Galadriel? Because they wanted to show that she was testing them, and we should start being a bit concerned about Boromir. But in the books, we're to see that he's a strong-willed person. None of them, as far as we know, we're not told what happened in each of these things, but none of them seem to have given in to this, in the sense that she offers them a way to go back. None of them seem to, as far as we can tell, actually accept this. Homebody saying she told Gandalf after the fact that Boromir was in peril, but too little too late. Yeah, so there's hints here that she did sense something, but not enough to do anything, or perhaps she sensed the greater pattern, because you have to remember that Boromir doing what he did, trying to take the ring from Frodo, pushed Frodo into a decision that ultimately led to the destruction of the ring. If he hadn't have done that, then what would have happened? Well, maybe he would have gone back to Gondor, and maybe all of the gang would have crossed over the river to the eastern bank, and maybe they would have been easier to find. Maybe they wouldn't have. Maybe Gollum wouldn't have befriended them and shown them that other way in. There's a lot of possibilities here, but this is just one of the building blocks of things that had to happen in order for the end result to work out for them. Yes, I missed what you said exactly, but she says when Gandalf appears much later there, then yes, she says to him basically, he's in peril. There's something not right there. But by that point, it gone. She'd given everyone their gifts. She pushed them off into the river, and all was good. Okay. Callie Summers, hi there, Callie, saying Boromir thought it would take a miracle to get the ring to Mordor. It took several divine interventions. If he grew up with Elrond, whose dad was a star, would he have been more like Aragorn? It's an interesting one of these sort of what if questions, isn't it? I suspect that yes, there would have clearly been a very different feel if you grow up with someone like Elrond and the elves. Then that's going to be very different to growing up in an atmosphere where you're expected to be the king in waiting, effectively, and you're told every day by your father, Sauron and his forces are coming here to wipe us out. Elrond had more hope than Denethor, amongst many other things. The facet of Denethor's character which passed down, in many ways, most importantly, I think, to Boromir, was this sense of there's doom. Is probably the right way of saying it. Denethor ultimately just felt that there's no way out of this. We're all going to die. That's how far it got him. Boromir seems not to have got that far, but he did get to a point where he just sees there's no. He can't conceptualize other ways out of this. We just have to do the things that we can do to try and hold back the tide of Sauron's forces. So perhaps growing up elsewhere with slightly more optimism, slightly more open-minded people in terms of possible solutions might have helped him. Yeah. Lots of great things going on in the chat right now. I'll pick up as much as I can in the chat as we're going through on this one, I think. But I will do another question from one of my patrons, which is from Reed M, saying, "Hi, Robert. I believe it is accepted that Ulmo whispered to Boromir to go to Rivendell. Could he also have been involved in making sure his horn was found by Faramir and Faramir's vision of Boromir's death?" So, yes, I mean, I wouldn't say it's universally accepted that the vision that Faramir and Boromir got, the dream, was from Ulmo. But I think that if you did a straw poll of Tolkien experts, most people would say that he's the most likely. The fact is that this dream came from someone, and because it clearly it's true. It's trying to make Faramir or Boromir go up to Rivendell. Now, we're therefore not just coming up with a tinfoil, I wonder whether Ulmo did this. It's a matter of who did this. And it seems to be coming from somebody who's trying to tie together ultimately the Fellowship, and it's somebody who is from the West. Now, the West is where thematically, at the very least, things have changed slightly geographically, but this is where the Valar are. Now, the question therefore is, who among the Valar might have been giving that message? And so let's go back to why we see this is in that dream. I thought the eastern sky grew dark and there was growing thunder, but in the west a pale light lingered, and out of it I heard a voice, remote but clear. So the voice is coming from the west. And which Valar should we say this possibly is? Well, the obvious person might be Manwë, but that's not really his style. And what we're told is that of all the Valar, the only one who did not ever abandon the children of Ilúvatar, elves and humans, was Ulmo, the Lord of Waters. So he is very probably the favorite. When you add in this fact that we're told specifically that this dream came while they were on the banks of the Anduin, he is the Lord of Waters, therefore it kind of makes sense. That's his kind of realm. So it's likely, it's not a slam dunk, it's not 100%, but this seems likely this came from him. What about bringing Boromir's body back? And Faramir seeing it, and then the horn itself getting washed up. Is that anything to do with Ulmo? Well, again, water is clearly very much involved here. There seems to be something supernatural, it has to be said, about a small boat going over this huge waterfall, and then just seemingly carrying on going without any noticeable massive damage or broken up in any way, but just carrying on floating down the river. That seems suggestive of some external sort of input here. And again, Ulmo, there are sort of lesser Valar effectively who are in charge of rivers and things like that, but Ulmo as the great driving force again seems most likely. Why is this important? Well, that Faramir sees this, well, we'll come on to that in a little bit later. I've got a question about that. Why is it important that the horn gets washed up and taken back to Denethor? Well, this means that Pippin can then gain his confidence much later when Pippin tells the story of what happened. And Pippin having the confidence of Denethor is incredibly important much later on, because it means that he is there right at the denouement when Denethor is finally giving up on life and everything, and he can go and get help. So these things are important, but not in an obvious way, only in the kind of way that you can see the bigger pattern of what's going on, which is, again, exactly what you'd expect from one of the Valar. Let's... A reflective rambling saying, is Ulmo the Blood Raven of Middle-earth at this rate? No, Ulmo is not the Blood Raven of Middle-earth at this time. Ulmo is all wise and all good and all wonderful. Blood Raven is the, when in doubt, blame Blood Raven, clearly. But his motivations and his character are not quite as positive as Ulmo's, I would say. But I like the... sort of the cross-reference. Let's go to Maura Lee saying, Boromir attempted to take the ring from Frodo. Was it out of fear, loss, wanting power in order to reclaim lost glory for his home and people? Is the reason why he could not face Galadriel because he was ashamed of himself for wanting the ring? Do you think it was also his pride? So why did Boromir try and take the ring from Frodo? So all of the things you've mentioned, I suspect, play their part. But what the ring does is it plays on the thing that you want, the thing that you're desiring, the thing that you think that you might be able to achieve if only you had that little bit extra power. And that's what it's playing on with with Boromir, because the great tragedy is that actually, to start the first half of what Boromir is saying or wanting actually is entirely understandable. His people are facing an existential threat and he wants to save his people. He thinks that he has a way to save those people and he therefore wants the ring. That far is entirely understandable and entirely logical. It's only when you then take it to the next bit and it's the, yes, but he could then defeat Sauron and then they could be ruling much better and more wisely than that. That's the point at which it starts to get a lot more twisted for him. So I covered the bit about the why he couldn't face Galadriel. I mean, I don't think that being ashamed of himself for wanting the ring, I don't think he felt shame for he's already basically said many times over what he thinks that the ring could achieve. He doesn't think, he's not ashamed of that in any way, shape, or form. He thinks that this is a thing that he can do to actually make the world a better place. And you see this again and again. Gandalf says it, and Galadriel says it, and the wise acknowledge the fact that they would take the ring in an attempt to do good. They would. That's what their feeling was, that they could have the ring and they could use it in a way that others perhaps couldn't. But the wise realize that that's just seductive nonsense. They would not be able to do that. They might start off with good intentions, but they would not end up in a good place. And so basically Boromir's fault is that he could not do that extra wise bit, which is him acknowledging the fact that him having the ring, he would not be able to control it. Now, I don't think we should be too harsh on him for this, because I mean, you can say this to people, oh, you couldn't handle it, but he's not as learned and wise. We know that he doesn't read huge amounts of books. He's just trying to find a solution to the problem that he has in front of him. So I don't think that we can actually, and I don't think Tolkien wants us to be looking at him with any kind of disdain here. I think we are to see a tragedy. We're to see a character who wanted what he thought was best, but he could not control his desire for power in order to achieve that. Okay, let's have a quick look in the chat. Kraken Tacos, hi there, great to see you, saying Boromir was done dirty by Peter Jackson. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of characters who were done dirty. I think Faramir had a worse character transformation, I think, than Boromir. I think with Boromir they simplified it, is what it was. With Faramir they changed him, because he in the films he basically gives in to temptation. He decides to take Frodo back to Denethor. In the books he doesn't. We'll get on in just a moment as to why he doesn't, but that's a complete character shift there. With Boromir, the basic building blocks are there, and Sean Bean clearly did an excellent job, but that gives extra layer of nuance, I think, with him. I don't know whether done dirty is the right way. Let's see. Let's go to a question. peoples against the growing and encroaching power of Mordor and its allies. But that struggle has long been without any real hope. He is not by any stretch of the imagination a bad person per se, but the above, in combination with the lack of wisdom of figures like Gandalf or Elrond, or even for that matter, even of his younger brother Faramir, makes him susceptible to the lure of the ring. More so than any other single member of the Fellowship. He unwisely thinks that Sauron's power imbued in the ring can be used against Sauron and Mordor, which, to be fair, it can, but not without a terrible price. The rest, as in the end of the Fellowship of the Ring, is history. Yeah, so I think that's a really good kind of summary. That's why I was very happy to read all of that out. It's we're not to see him, I think, as a bad person. I don't think Tolkien wants us to see him as a bad person. Flawed, proud, perhaps very single-minded and focused, and unwilling to take the counsel and wisdom of others, but not a bad person. He was wanting to do the right thing, which is to defend his people. At which point, I always try and do this partway through my live streams. Can I just say, moderators, thank you. I always say thank you to the moderators. You always do an amazing job. If you are in the live chat, could you please show a little bit of love to the moderators? I would hugely appreciate it. And also, patrons. Thank you. I can't do what I do without your support. So I hugely appreciate that. I will be going out to $10 plus patrons. One of the perks of being a $10 plus patron is a chance every now and then to influence the content of what I do. So I will be going out probably tomorrow to my patrons there, just asking for a steer on what I do next with these live streams. I'm going to carry on for the Lord of the Rings. We do Lord of the Rings about once a month. I'll carry on through the Fellowship. I'm quite enjoying doing that series. But over on A Song of Ice and Fire, we've sort of come to the end of the Targaryen kings. I might do another couple of just like Viserys and people like that who they claimed to be king, but actually they weren't ruling. But where do we go after that? I've got a few different ideas. As I say, I will put them. If you're a $10 plus patron, keep an eye out. I will put a poll or something up there at some point in the next day or so. If you do want to support this channel, the best way to do it is through Patreon. There is a link down in the description. Okay, let's get back into this. Question from... reflective rambling, or picking up, thank you, picking up a question for Lucian. I love it when people do this, picking up questions for others. That's very kind of you. Is there a particular Boromir scene not included in the Peter Jackson trilogy that people should pay close attention to on a reread? Oh, that's a really interesting question. Any particular scene not included? I mean, most of his scenes are included. I think it's not so much a scene that's not included. It's if you take a look at the stuff that they sort of edited down. So we're first introduced to him at the Council of Elrond. Now, in the films, then immediately you get Boromir sort of jumping up to his feet and like being all demonstrative. We should take this. We can use this. It is a gift, and really getting quite angry and passionate about it. He does get a little bit like that in the books, but not to the same extent. The main thing you see is his pride, and his pride in not just himself, but the people of Gondor and the role that they've been undertaking all this time, and the danger, his awareness of the danger that they're facing, and his near exasperation of like these people simply do not understand. They're just they're here having these big long conversations about random old things. Turns out they've got this great magical item and they're just not doing anything. Do they not understand how we could use it? That sense of frustration, which, as I say, in the films, it sort of immediately comes out with him sort of jumping up and arguing with people. But this growing sense of frustration, the last time I was reading through the books, this came out so loud and clear to me, is that he's been on this huge voyage, and he's not the journey all the way up to Imladris and back, and for nothing. And every big thing that bit of advice that he comes up with, we should take the ring to Gondor, we shouldn't go over the misty mountains of Caradhras, we shouldn't go into the misty mountains, we shouldn't go to Lothlorien. Every single time he has like a strong view on something, he basically gets completely ignored. And on a very human level, given the fact that this is a person who has grown up as to lead, to be the person who people take orders from, on a very human level, I think that started to grate with him. I think it got to the point where nobody was really taking him seriously, as far as he could tell. And it was just, well, what on earth is all of this for? Why on earth have I been on this long journey all this time, actually for nothing? Because nothing I have said has resounded with anyone whatsoever. They might have said, oh yeah, we understand that, but you're wrong. It's if you just imagine yourself in that position, of course you're going to start getting frustrated. So that, I think, is the kind of on my last read through, it's not a specific scene, it's just this every single time he suggests something, he says something, he asserts something, he gets voted down, overruled, ignored. Let's go to a question from Callie Summers saying, hi, Robert. Although Sean Bean's performance was amazing, Boromir is one of the characters most simplified in the movies, alongside Denethor and Gimli. I would agree. Every time I read the books, I'm struck by how humanly heroic Boromir is. He's out of his depth and has no special resistance to the power of the ring. He's like Hawkeye trying to keep up with the rest of the Avengers. What's your takeaway from the fact that Boromir was the only fully human member of the Fellowship, but he was the only one who faltered and the only mortal who died? Yeah, it's a really interesting set of questions. So why he is there, why he was the one who faltered, why he was the one who died, I'll just give you one little perspective on this, which is that when you think of the literary need to show the power of the ring, which I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, but I think this is the heart of it, is that Tolkien's created this ring of power. And until this moment, we've not really seen it. We saw Bilbo having his moment like that. We see that Frodo's like feeling the weight of it. We hear a story about Gollum, but we haven't met Gollum yet in this story. So we haven't actually got that demonstration. Writers always talk about show, don't tell. And we've been told that this is a powerful ring, but we've not been shown it yet. So he really did have to show the power of the ring, I think, at some point in this section of the book. And he had to do that with a character who was relatively central and relatively important. So just like a random side person getting influenced by the ring probably wouldn't give us a real buy-in to this. We're supposed to be, we've seen it so many times now, read it so many times, Boromir turning on Frodo is supposed to be a shock. It's supposed to be wrenching for us. This is the Fellowship. These are the people who are sworn to be protecting Frodo. And Boromir is now turning on Frodo. This is supposed to be, and it would have been for people reading it the first time, this really shocking. So who does he do this with out of the Fellowship? Well, he's not going to do it with any of the hobbits, because the hobbits, this is part of the central idea about what the hobbits are like. Their simplicity, actually, and their friendship and loyalty to Frodo means that that's not them. He's not going to do it with Gandalf. He's got other plans for. Aragorn throughout has to remain slightly above all of this kind of stuff. We've already established that dwarves have got a greater resistance to this kind of power of the ring, and Legolas as an elf, similarly, elves seem to be slightly more ethereal and above it. The person who it works most obviously for is a human, echoing Isildur, and a human who has got a very clear motive for why he needs the ring. So Legolas, for example, didn't have a very clear motive for why he needed the ring. Boromir did. So I think that's the literary reason why Boromir was the one who was chosen. But this isn't just like trying to manipulate the story to make sure that this happened. This is actually the way that the world has been set up. This is an outcrop from that. This actually makes complete sense. That, of course, the people of Gondor are wanting to defend themselves. And, of course, there should be some difference of opinion as to what happens with the ring. And they are not people. Boromir is not a person who's going to go, oh, wow, it's Elrond. Wow, you're so amazing. He's never come across Elrond before. Why he wouldn't be blown away by Elrond. Similarly, Gandalf, his father had a very disdainful view of Gandalf, so he's probably quite suspicious of him. Then you get the whole problem with Aragorn as well. He is the character who it fits every single aspect of him that he should be the person who is slightly outside of this group. Right, let's go to Chaos Ballerina. Hi there, saying theory. Boromir never had the dream. He only pretended to so he could take charge of the situation and protect his brother. It's why he, but not Faramir, gives in to the ring. He was never meant to be there. So this is interesting. So did he actually have the dream, or just pretend to have the dream to protect his brother? Personally, whereas I like this a lot, I think he probably did, because this is how he takes it seriously, and this is how he takes it to their father. And by the time he gets all the way up to Rivendell, there's absolutely no reason for him to be pretending that he had the dream. He could just say, my brother had a dream. So I don't personally buy into that bit, but I think the bit which is intriguing is this idea of, should it have been Faramir? Because the dream went to Faramir, and then it went to him again and again and again, and then finally it's almost as if it's like, oh, okay, we'll go to Boromir. So why is that? What would have happened had Faramir? And I either did. This is one of those things. I've done so many videos nowadays on this kind of subject. I think I did do one on this quite a while ago, because it's a fascinating idea. If Faramir had gone, what would have happened? Well, again, it's one of those things that actually Faramir needed to be in where he was in Ithilien to help Frodo at that precise moment in time. And if their roles had been switched over, let's imagine that Boromir had been there, and then he'd found Frodo and Sam. Now, Boromir would then have given in to the power of the ring at that point and tried to take Frodo and Sam back to Denethor. I have absolutely no doubt about that whatsoever. So regardless of which way round it was, I think that Boromir was going to fall. So it's a very intriguing idea that perhaps Faramir should have gone. Perhaps Ulmo or whoever gave the dream wanted it to be Faramir, because he's the brother who actually probably seems better suited to this. But in reality, there was a bigger plan going on in the background. Martin S saying, how does Legolas's eyes and elven eyes in general work? Is it like a powerful, ultra expensive super telephoto lens? Probably not exactly. Well, Tolkien doesn't give us these levels of detail. He's very open about the stuff that he's not an expert in, meaning to the extent of a little bit of faux modesty at times. But when people sort of ask him questions, I don't think we've got a record of anyone actually asking about how elven eyesight works. But when they're asking him questions about details of his world that he hasn't really thought about, then he basically says, well, I'm not really an economist or a geologist or whatever. So I've left some gaps in this. So this is a gap. Basically, they can just see further. It's not like they've got a zoom function, as far as we can tell. They can just see further and better in the same way that like a sighthound dog can see further and better, that kind of thing. Is there a hint of magic there? Well, elves are magical beings, but he has this really hazy line between what is magical and what is just natural. So they would not see this as being in any way abnormal. This is just what they are like. So yeah, the short answer is Tolkien did not give us the details of it. The slightly longer answer is that this is perfectly natural for elves. So there's no weird stuff going on the outside. They can just see further. Rico de Vries saying, good night, Robert, and to you too. Why did the ring corrupt Boromir and not Aragorn? Well, Aragorn was around the ring for a longer time. Greets from the Netherlands. Well, hello to the Netherlands. Why did it corrupt Boromir and not Aragorn? The short answer is that Aragorn was of stronger mind than Boromir, and so his resistance was higher. Boromir had an overriding desire as well for this, in a way that Aragorn did not. And what I mean by that is that the ring, it exploits people's great desire, what they really want at that moment in time. And whereas Aragorn, yes, the films have him like that, I don't know if I want to be king kind of thing. In the books, he thought this was what he was born to be, the king. It's just a matter of going through the hoops, but he wanted to do it slowly. He wanted to get there in his own pace. There was no rush to do this. So this great desire from him was not there in the way that for Boromir had this huge desire. He saw he'd faced the first onslaught of Sauron's forces. He knew that the next onslaught was going to be happening very soon, and he just had this great need in his mind for it. So that's what the difference between them really is. The two differences. The first is that Aragorn had generally this greater strength of mind. We see that in him, incidentally, through the Palantir. He had a kind of a battle of minds and wills with Sauron, and he emerged sweating, but he did emerge, and he has this really strong mind and willpower, Aragorn. So that's the first half of it. And the second half of it is that with Boromir, the ring it had a hook. it had a way in, and an immediate way in. Username redacted. Thank you very much. It just says message retracted. Hope if you did have a question, just flag it up to one of the moderators, and they will push it up for my attention. But thank you very much. Martin Sandberg saying, "Hi Robert, greetings from Denmark." Hi there. First time question. Was Boromir's horn magical, or was it just made with great craftsmanship, since it was super old and still worked perfectly? Thanks for all the great content, and sorry for the bad English. There's nothing to apologize for with the English. Perfect English. But was Boromir's horn magical? This is one of those interesting things where I started down this a couple of times, but it's worth just clarifying. Tolkien did not have a hard magic system. He did not explain how magic worked or even what was magic. There are things which look to us as magical that others in the world may not think of as magical. There's that great scene when Sam's in Lothlorien and he's sort of talking to Galadriel and says, "Is this elf magic?" Because he's always been obsessed with elf magic, and she's like, kind of looks at him quizzically and says, "Yeah, to you, I guess you probably would call this magic, but for them, it wasn't. This was just part of nature and part of how things worked." So exactly where the line is, Tolkien keeps deliberately a little bit fuzzy. That said, this horn, this was 1,000 years old by this point. So at the very least, this was made incredibly well so that it could still stay usable and robust all that time. But we do have a couple of other hints here. He blows the horn 3 times. And the first time is in Rivendell when he gets sort of selected for the fellowship, and he blows the horn there, and everyone's like, "Oh yeah, good horn." Then the second time he blows it in Moria when the Balrog and orcs are coming towards them when they're just on the bridge of Khazad-dûm or about to get to the bridge of Khazad-dûm. And then the third time, as we know, is when he's there calling for aid. When he's trying to protect Merry and Pippin. So let me read the second of those times when the Balrog and orcs are coming towards the Fellowship. And we read this: "The dark figure, streaming with fire, raced towards them. The orcs yelled and poured over the stone gangways. Then Boromir raised his horn and blew. Loud the challenge rang and bellowed, like the shout of many throats under the cavernous roof. For a moment, the orcs quailed, and the fiery shadow halted. Then the echoes died as suddenly as a flame blown out by a dark wind, and the enemy advanced again." Now, I read that because that is one of these kind of like, so what just happened there? Is that he blew the horn, and all of the orcs charging at him and the Balrog charging at him, they stopped. They faltered. And they even quailed, is what we're told. The orcs quailed when he blew a horn. And for a moment, even the Balrog was halted. Now, is that magic? It seems pretty magical to me. It was done away with quite quickly, but for a moment, that stopped everything. So that's the first kind of instructive. It's not, it doesn't tell us definitely, yes, this is a magical thing, but I think that's quite instructive. Then we get what Faramir says when he's talking to Frodo. He says, "That horn the eldest son of our house has borne for many generations. And it is said that if it be blown at need anywhere within the bounds of Gondor, as the realm was of old, its voice will not pass unheeded." So this is intriguing because he did blow it, and at the last with Merry and Pippin, and it was heard by Faramir and by Denethor, hundreds of miles away. Now, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli also heard it, and they came rushing to go and get him, to go and help. So that did come true, and it seems, again, the only way that we can describe this is magical. The way that it was heard hundreds of miles away by his family just seems, yeah, there's something about this. What could you write down the exact magical powers? Probably not. But that's not how Tolkien did his magic system. Incidentally, the within the bounds of, this is quite interesting, the exact wording here, if it be blown at need anywhere within the bounds of Gondor as the realm was of old, its voice will not pass unheeded. That's a really interesting, just like little extra bit added in there, because the bounds of Gondor of old were, do you remember the big statues of the two great Gondorian kings, and they're holding out their hands there, one either side of the river? That was the northern boundary of Gondor. So they had just come into Gondor, and so whereas those two previous times when he'd blown the horn, when he was in Rivendell and when he was in Moria, he was outside Gondor. This time he was just inside Gondor, and that's the time that it does get heard. So it's, yeah, all of the hints are there that this is magical, but Tolkien never explicitly says this is a magic horn. Let's go to Carl Carson saying OG equals Old Gondor. Absolutely. Das Börser Fleisch saying, I wonder if the morale boost effect from Gandalf's ring could have prevented Boromir from succumbing to the One Ring. Yeah, this is a really interesting one. So I don't have the quote to hand, but Gandalf's ring, the Ring of Fire, had the ability to raise the morale, give hope to those around. And you see this, again, it's not, Tolkien never says, oh, this is a +3 to morale tests for anybody within 100 yards of Gandalf or anything like that. He never actually sort of says something that explicit, but you sometimes see it. You sometimes see, like when he's there defending Minas Tirith, and you can read that as he rides through Minas Tirith, the Gondorian soldiers who were quailing in fear, understandably, suddenly gained hope as he was riding past. So you see it there, but also you see its absence with the Fellowship. When he dies, he falls in Moria, immediately they lose hope, and it feels hopeless to them. They can't imagine how they could possibly carry on without Gandalf there. They showed it, I think, really well in the films. That is one of the they get outside Moria, and they're just, there's no it's just a music, and it was quite quiet, and you can see them crying out, but you don't actually hear it. It was quite haunting. I'm sure you can picture the scene before Aragorn is there just trying to rally the troops, pull them up, come on, we've got to keep moving. This was something which it was very clear in the books as well. The moment that Gandalf fell, everybody just started to lose heart, more so than you might expect just from this. Obviously they've lost Gandalf, quite devastating, but the how they felt was gone. So does this have an impact on Boromir? Well, certainly that is a sort of a hinge point for him. When he gets into Lothlorien, he starts getting a little bit more suspicious. He starts focusing in a little bit more on Frodo. Once they leave Lothlorien, then that's when it starts to be really starting to consume him. So is it a coincidence? Personally, I think not. I think you're absolutely right with this. I think that Gandalf's ring will have helped have a positive impact there, and the absence of that will have contributed to him giving in to the power of the ring. Mark Shees is saying, could you clear a question for Callie Summers and me? Are the stewards of Gondor related to the royal line, aka Boromir? Is Boromir a descendant of Eärendil? Yes, they were. So the steward taking over was not in the royal line, but was just sort of like a cousin, I think. So it's sort of like quite a few steps up. So yes, but also they were from one of the noble. This is a noble line from Numenor. So you get Eärendil, and then you get Elros, and then from Elros you get actually lots. Yes, you can trace a line down, but that's not how genealogy works. It's all interconnected. So the great and noble families of Gondor, as well as Arnor back in the day as well, they all did have some of this kind of like elder Numenorian blood, so to speak. So it's not like the royal line was ended, but they were close to it, if that makes sense. I had one more question here. Martin S. saying, if Boromir got the ring in his attack on Frodo and somehow kept it for 500 years, what would he be like? What would a Gollumized Boromir look like? Well, it's an interesting question. Within that 500 years, I think one has to assume that he will have to come up against Sauron, and if he has survived 500 years, then presumably that means that he has defeated Sauron in some way. What would he look like? Well, I think it's Gollum looked as he did, not just because he was affected by the power of the ring, but because of the physical conditions that he was living in. So he went and lived in caves for 500 years, and so that's why his eyes started getting much brighter. He was more hunched over because of where he was living. His skin got a lot more pale because of the lack of vitamin D. So that was a lot of what contributed to him. What we don't know is, the short answer is we don't know exactly what Boromir would look like, but he would look like himself, but a lot more kind of drawn and haggard is basically the answer there. It's if you think about what Bilbo was like. So Bilbo had the ring actually for decades without anyone really paying much attention to it, and he just, you haven't aged a day. I mean, he was looking quite drawn, but not to the extent that Gollum did. So yes, he would look more haggard, but he would also still look recognizably him. Homebody saying Gollum probably also had scurvy. Yeah, probably, yeah. Okay, so let's go to a question from Mara Lee saying, one of the gifts that Galadriel gave Boromir, I believe, was a gold belt. Was it gold due to his rank? Why a belt? Was it only to identify his dead body when he got killed so early on in his role with the Fellowship? Okay, this is an intriguing one, because we look at these gifts from Galadriel quite a lot, but we focus in on the cool ones, as of course we do. The Phial of Galadriel, or the 3 locks of Galadriel's hair that Gimli got. Aragorn got a really cool bow. So that's there, but there were there were some less cool ones, it has to be said. Merry and Pippin both got silver belts, and Boromir got a gold belt. Now, why? I think perhaps it's because there was nothing immediately that any of those people needed. So that's a very practical reason. But if you want to go into kind of like, well, there's two ways to go with this. One of them is the kind of the literary criticism one, and one is the how this helps the story develop one. Let's do the how this helps the story develop first, which is what you're alluding to, I think, Maura, there, saying helping to identify his body. So when the boat with Boromir comes down the river and Faramir sees it, he mentions this to Frodo, and he says he saw Boromir and he looked like Boromir, but there was something that he didn't recognize, which is he had this magnificent gold belt on. And Frodo then says, yeah, that was his gift from Galadriel. We all got gifts from Galadriel. So, you elven craftsmanship, da-da-da. And this, it's not about identifying the body, because Faramir recognized his brother. But it was about Frodo gaining the trust of Faramir, because this just assured him of the truth of what Frodo was saying, because Frodo managed to sort of tie together why that was there, and that had the ring of truth to it. And Faramir, being quite an insightful guy, realized that, and that helped to get his trust, and that's why he sent Frodo on his way. So that's the reason within the story why it was important. And also, therefore, I suppose you could sort of take a step back from that and say Galadriel, being sort of wise and far-sighted, Galadriel would have known that, and or perhaps sensed that somehow, and that's why she gave it. But the kind of literary criticism approach to this is to say, well, symbolically, what's going on here? Symbolically, she gave Merry and Pippin silver belts. The elves love silver much more than they love gold. And this is why they gave Merry and Pippin those. However, Boromir, being a human, and humans prefer gold over silver, she gave him this gold belt. But symbolically, she is giving him a ring of gold around him. And he is the one, unlike the two hobbits, of course, who gives in to the lure of the ring, which itself is a ring of gold. So what she is symbolically doing is giving him here's your ring of gold. This is the thing you didn't ask for this, but this is being given to you. This should be sufficient. So if we're kind of looking, or even she kind of sensed a little bit about him and his connection to the ring, and maybe this is kind of like a warning to people, but there's an extra kind of layer going on there. It's the only really kind of gaudy thing that she's giving out, almost to other people, to show them something. Everyone else, they're all getting these cloaks, they're getting some nice provisions, then they're getting things like a cool bow or a bit of rope or something like that, things that are useful for them personally. This is just a gaudy thing that perhaps others can look at. Daniel Dipka saying she's taunting him. Yeah, absolutely. Joken Hagar saying, for rings of gold are always cold, but an orc's hands are warm. Thank you for that. Carl Karsnock saying they symbolically seal you off or encircle or guard you from the outside world as well. Belts, yes, very much so. Reflective Rambling saying that I claim not to be an elf stan, but I sense the Galadriel stan. Well, Galadriel is a great character. I will happily give you that. Right, let's go to. I've got, I think 3 more questions from my patrons here. As I say, I will try and pick through as many as I can in the chat. But Callie Summers with a Boromir adjacent question that has always bugged me. Why did no one ever retrieve the Osgiliath Palantir? After the Palantir fell into the river, Gondor controlled the city for more than 800 years before Sauron captured it. Certainly the stewards would have known about its existence. Even if it weighed 10,000 pounds, it seems hard to fathom that Gondor couldn't have bought or captured a few Mimikil to drag it out at that time. A single normal earth elephant can pull over 15,000 pounds. Good knowledge. So why did they not take the Palantir, the Osgiliath stone, and retrieve it from the River Anduin? So for those who need a quick history lesson on this, there were 7 of these Palantirs to start with. They obviously hugely magical. They were a way of talking across great distances, keeping the empire together. They're obviously a way of seeing across vast distances, so that you can see what's happening in lots of different places, and also you can look back in time even. These are incredibly powerful magical items. And one of these 7 was in the city of Osgiliath. Osgiliath bestraddled the Anduin River, big bridge going across it. In the middle of the bridge, the throne room, that got destroyed. And as a part of that, the Palantir fell into the middle of the Anduin River. Why, for hundreds of years, did they not try and get it out? So I think the first thing is we're not told. Maybe they did. Tolkien gives us bits of history, but he doesn't give us every detail of what's happened. Maybe they had an expedition to go and try and find it. But I think the broader point here is that we have to understand quite how big, massive a river the Anduin is. At this point, it's half a mile across, which for those who don't deal in miles, that's something like, 800 meters, something along those lines. This is massive river, and this will have fallen right in the middle of it. And the flow was quite strong. It would be carrying it down the current towards the sea, so they wouldn't know exactly where this was. And the closer it got to the sea, the wider the river becomes, as you would expect. But it's not just like, it gets a bit wider. By the time we get to Pelagia, which is the main sort of port that serves Osgiliath Minas Tirith, it's 1.5 miles wide. This is 3 times that by that point. So we're 1.5 miles, we're well over 2 kilometers wide by that point. By the time we actually get to it opening out the estuary into the river, then it's several miles wide. So this is not a small river. And yes, I'm sure that you could get some elephants, Mimikil, to be dragging things out, but you have to find it first. And I think, whereas maybe they had tried to start with, I think it's probably the kind of thing that you just accept it's gone. So that's my sort of broad answer on that one. It's a shame because it was an incredibly powerful magical item, but at the bottom, they didn't have deep sea diving bells or anything like that. And at the bottom of a huge river, no, it wasn't going to happen. Let's go to quite interesting. Carl Karsnark, I saw in the chat somewhere, saying, belts or girdles are associated with strength/chastity in many myths as well. And as we noted at the beginning, we're never given any, not even an explanation, not a hint of this, but Boromir was 41 by the time of The Lord of the Rings, and there's no hint that he never married, and there's no hint of anyone else on the scene there. So this strength/chastity thing does kind of encapsulate that, which perhaps this is an honouring of that in some way. You could also that's another element to that gift. Martin S. Saying about the bow Galadriel gave Legolas. If it was clearly superior to what Legolas already had as the Prince of the Woodland Realm, that implies that the bow craftsmanship of Lothlorien was greatly above the Woodland Realm. Yes. Now, the thing you have to remember about the Woodland Realm is that this, I think I did a video on the history of Mirkwood a while ago, but it's kind of worth emphasizing that the Woodland Realm, the elves that ended up in Mirkwood were deliberately not. They're not the craftsman types. They're not the ones trying to get new technology. They're not the ones who look out into the outer world and learn new things from them. When they did go to war, the one time before we get to the Lord of the Rings story, the one time we really read about them going to the war, the last alliance of elves and men, we read that they were lightly armored and not at all comparable to the other elf soldiers or the Númenórean soldiers, indeed. So this is more the feel we get from this is that this is elves who've decided they just want to get back to the good old days of what being an elf is like. Let's live in a forest. Let's live a happy, carefree life. We'll have feasts. We'll maybe do a bit of hunting. We'll live off the land, be close to nature. That's the kind of arts and crafts movement kind of feel to it. It's not about them doing bigger, better, faster, more. That is not what they're about. So would Galadriel and the Lothlorien elves be able to get better bows? Well, quite possibly. The elves of the Woodland Realm were not the most technologically advanced. Reflective Rambling, picking up for Lapu, thank you very much, saying, if Boromir lived, would he join the trip to Rohan or to return to Minas Tirith, see Denethor's corruption and assume stewardship himself? Well, I think that a lot of this depends on when you say if he'd lived. So if he'd, well, to rewind one moment, I think Boromir, by the point at which, if we assume that he does fall, so to speak, he does try and take the ring from Frodo, he's beating himself up about it by this point. And then Aragorn says, basically, go and protect Merry and Pippin. And he does that. And the only way I think that he lives is if he killed every single orc there. Because I think he had reached a point where he thought, I've done wrong. And I have to somehow make it up. And that's the conversation. The great lines he has at the end with Aragorn in the film, it's not exactly like that in the book. Basically, the book is like him saying, I did wrong. And Aragorn saying, yeah, I know, but you've made up for it now. And so he could die at peace. So I think the only way that he could have survived that is if he had killed every single orc there was, which I don't think was likely. And if he did, then Merry and Pippin would be safe. So the trip off to going after them, hunting for Merry and Pippin, going towards Rohan would not have happened, which means that the Fellowship, less Frodo and Sam, would then have decisions to be made. So what would have happened? Well, it's entirely possible, given Aragorn's stance, that he says we should just let them go. We should just let Frodo and Sam go. and then it's a matter of what Boromir does. Aragorn was committed to going to Minas Tirith, and I suspect that he would have gone with Boromir, at least partly, to ensure that Boromir did not then go after Frodo. So, of the options that you put there, I think going to Minas Tirith is probably the answer. Caius Ballerina, what was the nature of his relationship with Gandalf prior to the Fellowship? And then the second question I'll come up to in a moment. In terms of his relationship with Gandalf, so we're not told. He will have been aware of Gandalf. Gandalf had a bit of a history with Minas Tirith. Gandalf visited there every now and then, and Denethor didn't like it, because Denethor basically suspected that he was in league with Aragorn. He didn't want Aragorn to be coming back as this returning king. And Faramir had very much taken to Gandalf. They both liked spending long afternoons reading ancient scrolls deep out in the libraries of Minas Tirith. And so those two got on really well. But Denethor really did not like Gandalf. So whereas we do not see the relationship between Boromir and Gandalf, and it's not really reflected in The Lord of the Rings, there's not really much of a sort of a hint of a bad blood history between the two of them. I think we have to kind of assume he's somewhere between the two of them, because he cared about both his father and his brother. So the general feel is that he didn't come into the meeting, the Fellowship, the Council of Elrond, with a particular view of Gandalf. Perhaps he was the captain of the guard, perhaps the army, perhaps he was spending most of his time out there with the army rather than actually dealing with Gandalf. So perhaps he didn't know him as well. How long would it take a member of the Druidine to give in to the ring? Okay, so these are the Woses, the woodland folk. I suspect the answer is probably quite a long time. In the same kind of way as the hobbits, they're very attached into nature. They don't seem to have much by way of ambition. So I think that they would have been quite resistant to it. Let's go to Martin S. 1 mile is 1,609 meters, so half a mile is just over 800 meters. Yes, thank you. That's good clarification. Yes, so 800 meters long. Which actually, when you think about it, or wide, I should say, when you think about it, actually perhaps changes a little bit of perception of what Osgiliath was, because it's not just one city. It's like two cities joined together over a river. I don't know if anyone's been to Budapest, but it's that kind of feel. If you go to the Danube, there is incredibly wide. I suspect there are others even further down the Danube where it's even more so. But it's the bridges are incredibly long to get from Buda to Pest, and that's the kind of feel that we have here. Caius Ballerina, what exactly does the ring prey on? Is it ambition? Yes, ambition, a desire for power. It's the sort of the bad emotions within us that want us to have control, because this is we always have to remember, this isn't just a random magical ring. This is Sauron putting of himself into the ring. So the ring is a sort of an encapsulation of Sauron and Sauron's motivations. And so the kinds of things Sauron, we know, is all about control. And so this is about the power to be able to do the things that I want to do. Now, for Boromir, therefore, this is the power to be able to defend my people against Sauron. initially. It will have grown from that. And you get Sam is like the power to have an amazing garden, to be the greatest gardener in the world, because that was what he really wanted at heart. I mean, he probably didn't think about being the world's greatest gardener all that much, but that was what it preyed on. We have to think of this as being Sauron just concentrated into that ring. Question from Martin S. saying, I agree, it's very plausible within the larger context of Tolkien's story that Galadriel or any elf or elven group with a line back to Valinor could get their hands on equipment superior to the woodland realm. So Galadriel came, so she is a Noldorin elf. She and they were the great craftspeople, and she will have come with great knowledge. Now, it's fair to say in Lothlorien, although this is an incredibly beautiful place, there's not much sort of built infrastructure, but it is very clear that in their gifts they have continued in this. What I was talking about earlier is this kind of like fuzzy line that Tolkien has between craft and magic, and so you get that the magic rope that Sam gets, that was made by the elves, but it's also magical. You get the lembas bread. That is something that came all the way over from Valinor, and this is something that will have been remembered and brought all the way from there. So, yes, absolutely. I think Galadriel is a huge part of this. Let's go to a brother's ardor. Hi there, by the way, saying, do you think had Boromir lived, he'd have been a leal and faithful brother and vassal to Aragorn, like I do? How would Denethor have reacted to Boromir championing Elisar and Gandalf? So I don't know. I think this is a really hard one. So he doesn't give that speech, as I'm sure you know, that the speech that's in the film about, I would have followed you, my brother, my captain, my king. He doesn't give that speech in the books, so they make it a lot more explicit in the film. In the books, would he have come round to it? I think his loyalty to his father would have been incredibly strong. I think he would have had a problem had Denethor still been living. The issue is that Aragorn did not. He was not wishing to claim the throne of Gondor initially, sort of going in and saying, "Here I am, give me the throne of Gondor." He sort of waited to be acclaimed by the people. So after when he basically takes on the crown, it's because Denethor's dead, Boromir's dead, Faramir's left, and he's sort of acting steward at this point, and he gives this little speech to the people and said, do you accept Aragorn as your king, basically? And they all go, yeah. I think that and before that point, Aragorn had been really careful. He'd been camped outside. He'd not wanted to go in, lest it be interpreted as him trying to take control. So I think Aragorn would have held back. And I think that Denethor was doomed from the start. If we'd got to the point at the end of all of this and Boromir had survived and Aragorn had shown the leadership, then yes, I think I would agree with you. But it probably wouldn't have been on the same kind of timescale that we have seen. Let's go to and loved The Hobbit, but Lord read were, I tried to take the ring from Frodo, he said. I'm sorry, I have paid. I read through the point through to the point of him being put on the boat and put to rest, and it struck you to discuss these ramifications. Also, I wanted to ask what line or part of the story has stuck with you. So I will. So there's two parts of that. I don't know. My chat disconnected for a moment. I hope that the stream carried on, but I think you're still here. So the first part of that, just this connection between Boromir and Ned Stark, and their sort of their death having ripples across the story. Yes, absolutely. I think that this is there, and I think this is one of those things where we've got the advantage of having George R. R. Martin still alive, and it's noticeable that when casting for Game of Thrones, there were only two casting bits of advice that he gave, one of which was Peter Dinklage. I think he saw him and decided, yep, that's perfect for Tyrion. And the other was Ned Stark and Sean Bean. And looking back, it's great casting, but you can see immediately the links between the two characters, because they are both noble. They are both from ancient houses who are very proud, but perhaps have forgotten a bit of the history that's quite important. And they both are kind of lost in the politics of it, not really sure how to handle it, and eventually everything gets out of hand, and their weaknesses do lead to their deaths. So there is a clear echo, I think, between the two of them, and this is why the casting, I think, is fascinating, because George R. R. Martin clearly saw Sean Bean can do that. He can carry that off. Therefore, I want him to have this similar type of character in Game of Thrones. In terms of your second bit, whether there's one line or part of the story that has stuck with me, I find this a fascinating question, because I first wanted to say no, it's all the story, but there are bits that sort of resonate and have always resonated with me more, but not for a particular reason. I think that they're the central part of the story, or I think that they're misunderstood or anything along those lines. But there's just for me, the Mines of Moria segment works astonishingly well. I've that's always resounded with me. And when I was trying to work out what is it about that section that worked, it was, I think, for me, the moment at which Tolkien just opened up the world. And in that, I mean, we start the story in the Shire. Everything is relatively easily contained. We understand what's going on. We get told about the ring. We get the background and history to the ring. We have the Council of Elrond. We get bits more background. Everything fits together. But by the time we get to Moria, suddenly it's like we thought we understood everything that was going on here. We thought we understood the whole lot. But this world is so much bigger than that, because you get the Watcher in the Waters who does, up there fighting them. And it's like, well, what was that? And Gandalf's like, I don't know. It's really old, really ancient. Exactly what it is, I don't know, but I'll use this as a way to warn you that there might be even deeper, darker things in there. And then you get in there, and you have this huge underground city that clearly has a massive history, and we learn a little bit about this massive history, but not everything. And then also Balin, and we just see what happened. We don't get all of the detail about Balin's mission, but we just see the ends of it. Then we get the Balrog suddenly appearing, and it's just when, first of all, Gandalf doesn't know what it is. He just knows that there's some big evil presence coming, and he puts up this kind of, it's not force field. It's more sort of like a locked door kind of spell going on, and then the Balrog just like bashes it away, and like Gandalf's like, "Whoa, I don't know what that is," but that's that. I now can't do magic for a long time because that's really powerful. And everybody has to retreat away, and it's like, this foe is beyond all of you, and the whole thing suddenly escapes, sort of transcends from being this smaller story where we thought we understood it, we thought we knew all the backstory, to this is actually part of a massive world. None of those things there will impact the rest of this story. The Moria, the Watcher in the Waters, the Balrog, even these things, they are there, and they've got their own vibrancy and life and massive history that Tolkien has worked out, but we just don't need it in that bit of the story. And then that, for me, has always resounded, because it's like from then on, it's like we're exploring things that anything could happen. It's not just this very structured story. This is a much more wide open story. I don't know whether that makes sense, but that's just the way it's always worked for me. Callie Summers asking, if Boromir showed his growing respect for Aragorn, would Denethor have accepted him too, or would Denethor's distrust have swayed Boromir back? I think Denethor accepting Aragorn, I think, would be a very, very long shot. By this point, he was quite mentally unstable, let's put it that way. And no, I don't think there was any chance of Denethor ever sort of coming on side. If Boromir had come back and found Denethor like that, I think that would his Denethor's distrust have swayed Boromir back? Potentially. I mean, we're all in the world of sort of ifs and whats and maybes. Depends on when they arrive. But if they arrive back just as Sauron's forces were starting to attack, then Boromir would have just gone straight into the battle, and that probably wouldn't have been an issue in the slightest. Okay, let's go to last question from my patrons. After that, I will pick up on as much as I can in the chat. This is Callie Summers. And thank you for this question, Callie. This has had me smiling. What was Sam Gamgee's tax policy? He was the only elected official in the Shire and served almost 50 years. Men weren't allowed to enter the Shire, but it was still part of the reunited kingdom. And the mayor was officially a councillor of the North Kingdom. And the sheriffs and postmasters must have had some payment. Was Sam progressive, or did he want to keep Hobbit life as it had been? And is that problematic, in that he became part of the landed wealthy right before deciding to maintain a system of persistent socioeconomic stratification? Right. Sam Gamgee's tax policy. Let's dig into this. So this is after the Lord of the Rings, for those who are not quite sure where this all fits in. After the Lord of the Rings, the Aragorn officially grants sort of self-governance. It's not independence, but it's self-governance for the Shire. He expands the Shire a bit. He clarifies the borders of the Shire, and he says that humans aren't allowed in. So the hobbits are running it all themselves, as they basically had been before that. Sam gets elected 7 times for the 7-year term of the Mayor of Michel Delving, which is the only elected post for the Shire, and he is the symbolic head of state, basically. We're told that his only real duties as mayor were to turn up to big parties and celebrations and give a speech or something like that. Hobbits don't like long speeches, so he would have just turned up and said a few nice words and then let everybody carry on with their dancing and drinking and having fun. But that was the job as mayor. But you quite rightly point out there are two sort of centralized services within the Shire. One is the postal system, and the other one is the sheriffs, which is basically the police. Now, there was a third, incidentally, which was that they had a commitment to upkeep of the roads and the bridges for the king. So there's a few small matters, but broadly speaking, it has to be said that the Shire was a very decentralized politically and economically place, and we do not hear anywhere of income taxes or anything like that. So how are these few small services paid for? Well, I think the implication has to be, first of all, Tolkien did not say. This was one of those things where he goes, well, I'm not really an economist. I think you might be overthinking this with all the faux modesty. But I think we can make a reasonable guess that we can have the postal system could operate very easily just on, if you want to send a letter to Buckland, then the postman picks it up from you and you pay him a shilling or whatever it is. That, I think, is just an easy way for that. It doesn't have to be central funded. But they obviously, they kind of report into, technically they report into Sam. Then the other being the sheriffs. There aren't many of them, it has to be said. But the justice system within the Shire, this is going deep stuff here, but the justice within the system within the Shire is very localized and it's very family based. We're told Tolkien does write about this. He basically says if there's any disputes, if there's any trouble, then that gets dealt with in the family. If it can't be dealt with in the family, then it's like basically the local old, respectable, lordly family in the area that deals with it. And so you get things like the Tooks, for example, or the Brandybucks in their areas. They're the big, important old family, and they are the ones that the head of that house will preside over matters locally. I think the implication is that the sheriffs perhaps would have worked off of contributions from those noble families. I think that's kind of what the implication must be. And as for the road network, perhaps everybody just helped out. That's the kind of place that the Shire was. They did this when they were all having big parties and the like. They would all sort of muck in and do a few things here and there. So I think it makes a lot of sense that people would just help out to keep up the road network. So I think that's my take on it. So Sam is anti-tax. That's probably where I would put there. Do you think, this is probably a slightly tongue-in-cheek thing, was it problematic that he became one of the landed wealthy right before deciding to maintain a system of persistent socioeconomic stratification? I think that you could argue that he did take on Bag End and become a part of the ruling elite, and he clearly didn't change anything. But I think that's the key point here, is that the hobbits didn't want to change anything. They just enjoyed the life as it was. It's not that Sam was holding back progress going on with the hobbits. The hobbits liked life as it was. So that was the last question I've got from my patrons, but I will pick up some some more questions in the chat. Martin S. saying, is it not implied somewhere that there might be stuff in the depths of Middle-earth that not even the Valar know about? I might be wrong, but I seem to vaguely remember something like it. Yes, definitely. Gandalf says it. There are, I forget the exact quote, but yes, there are things even deeper in underground, like when he's talking about the Watcher in the Waters. There are things that even he doesn't, and the Valar by implication may not know about. They don't know. There are things within Tolkien's world which are kept deliberately not explained. Ungoliant is one of them. Tom Bombadil's another. Watcher in the Waters is another. What exactly are these beings? We can discuss that. We probably all got ideas, but the point is that they're never fully categorized. And so the implication is that there were things after the creation of everything. The beings moved into Middle-earth. The sort of the lower order beings, the Maiar level beings that fell with Morgoth effectively. And some of these we know about, like the Balrogs. Some of these stayed with the Valar for a while, like Sauron did. He was then known as Myron, so he didn't fall immediately. It took a while. And some perhaps entered in, and we don't know exactly where or what happened to them. The Valar are not all-knowing, is probably the short answer there. Let's go to just get the chat. Lucian saying Sam the benevolent dictator. Beres Aurelius saying Sam Gamgee, a potato in every pot. Richard Seymour saying Frodo defunded the police before Sam took over. Terra Incognita saying, how was the Shire governed before? Exactly the same way. This was how it was. So they set up, when they moved in to the Shire, they got permission from the then King of Arnor, and they were allowed to be self-governing, provided they... I think it was just two stipulations. The first stipulation was that if the king ever required them to come and help out with an army, then they would do that, which they claim they did in the Battle of Fornost, although there were no records of this. And secondly, that they were to maintain the road and bridge network through the Shire to enable people to be getting through there nice and easily, which they did. So other than that, they just kept on. I did a whole video about the politics of the Shire and how that setup is. So if you want the detailed answer, it's there. But broadly speaking, it didn't really change over time, is the short answer. And before and after the War of the Ring, broadly the same. I'm having a quick flick through the chat. Brothers Arda saying, got to go, I'm tired and puppy needs me. Every blessing to you. And RTL Marty D saying, Moria showed that there was a vast living world independent and outside of the fairy tale storyline. Yes, absolutely. Terra Incognita saying, do you think he did his own gardening? This is Sam, I assume, rather than Boromir. Yes, absolutely. And Chloe Leon saying, rarely make the live streams. Wanted to say I love the channel and thank you for the amazing content. Well, thank you very much. I hugely appreciate that. And with that, I think I'm going to start drawing this one to a close. But I want to tell you first what's coming up. So I've started upping my video production in recent weeks, so hopefully now you should be able to see over on the main channel. I'm aiming to be doing on Mondays. We are getting Lord of the Rings videos. On Fridays we will be getting a Song of Ice and Fire videos, and then on Wednesdays, as often as I can, I will be doing something random. It might be a Witcher video, it might be an introduction to something that I don't generally cover on the channel, but I quite enjoy doing the introduction to videos. I did one on the Wheel of Time, which people seem to enjoy. Maybe it'll be just another bonus Lord of the Rings or Song of Ice and Fire video, but that's the kind of plan over on the main channel. Here next week we will come back. I think I will do. Let's do one on Viserys, just as the king across the water, and then after that, I will. So in the next day or so, I'm going to be going to my patrons and asking them what I should be covering next in terms of live streams on the Song of Ice and Fire front, and then we'll pick up on that after I've done Viserys, I think. Okay, so. That's all for this time. Thanks, everyone, for some excellent questions again. I love this character of Boromir. He's the more you get into him, the more layers you do find. If you are watching this back a little bit later and you would like to see some more live streams I've done, there's a link appearing somewhere around here. If you would like to support this channel, there's a link around here to my Patreon page, which is the best way to do that. Okay, take care, everyone, and I'll see you again next week.